Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to start out with an update on all the UFO disclosure news that's been happening. I last told you about a SCIF that was supposed to happen on October the 26th. Turned out that it wasn't very revealing. Some of the reps afterward had something to say about it. This was held, as I said, on October the 26th, and members of the House Oversight Committee had a private briefing in a SCIF, and that's an acronym that means a sensitive, compartmentalized information facility. Which is necessary when you share classified information. That's why Grush was unable to give full testimony during his last UAP hearing on July the 27th. So the members of Congress finally got their SCIF meeting with the Inspector General. Grush was not there. There was an issue with paying for his expenses. Senator Gillibrand was quoted as saying that he wanted Congress to pay for his airfare, and Gillibrand stated that it was not in Congress's budget. The Inspector General, though, did have all the information prior that Grush had given him. I'd like to show a clip to show Tim Burchett's reaction afterward. Because following this session, the various reps were very outspoken about their view that this session was pointless because they did not have the required clearance. Makes you wonder why they didn't tell them that beforehand. It turned out to be a big waste of time. Here's Tim Burchett with his commentary.
Tennessee Congressman and UFO enthusiast Tim Burchett went into a SCIF at the Department of Defense to be briefed on much anticipated secret information about unidentified, how the administration keeps tabs on them. On this UFO podcast, he signaled it was a letdown. Let's watch.
Didn't really have any real hopes because that's what we're getting. I told somebody it's like all these guys are like, when I talk to them, they're like looking down the barrel of a .22 rifle. It's just very narrow and very straight. And they're honestly I feel like they're telling the truth within their limited scope, but it is very compartmentalized.
Whistleblower David Grush was not in attendance. When asked if people pulling the strings in the background are blocking info from coming out, this is what Burchett said.
You know, since 1947, they've told us these things don't exist, and then now they tell us they do exist, but now nobody can tell us where we can look to see where they exist. You know, it's just it's like peeling off the layers of an onion. You get down and you get another layer.
It sounds like Tim Burchett is one of the few congresspeople who's actually taking this problem seriously. I was heartened by that previous hearing that they had where a lot of the congresspeople were very open-minded about asking questions of the witnesses and what they had seen or what they had been privy to or heard from secondhand sources. But it seems like since then, the fervor has kind of died down, and a lot of people have kind of forgotten about the UAP issue. They prepared for this hearing and then kind of just moved on. So very few people are involved, it seems, in continuing to investigate this, which is really a shame.
I hope that's not the case. As I said, the only block during that SCIF meeting on October the 26th was the lack of clearances. And the Congress people in attendance lacked the requisite clearances to be fully read into the DOD, Department of Defense, and Inspector General's information on that topic. Hopefully that can be remedied for the next UAP hearing that's coming up. Various members of Congress reiterated the desire to establish a select committee to investigate the UAP topic. On November the 15th, there'll be another SCIF briefing, and members of Congress hopefully will have their clearances by then, and they'll be discussing the UAP related matters in another SCIF environment, sensitive, compartmentalized information facility, a SCIF, and they'll be discussing this with the Intelligence Community Inspector General, Monheim, on the 16th of November. Beyond that, the Non-Disclosure Authorization Act, FY24, which includes the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023, is still being bounced back and forth by the senators and the members of Congress. They have to reconcile and get their act together. And hopefully, and I expect this to be done and passed by December of 2023. Following the UAP hearing on the 26th of July, members of Congress have consistently called for a select committee with subpoena authority to go about the task of collecting information from the Pentagon and elsewhere. Representatives Moskowitz, Luna, and Burchett have repeatedly stated their intent to hold field hearings also, and to overcome the stonewalling from Pentagon and military establishment. She's quoted as saying, "I think Congress should try to get into one of these places," and by one of these places she means where they're keeping all the UAP evidence. And if they won't let us in, then we should have a field hearing right outside the building. Okay, she's pretty brazen there. And the military will have to explain why that is. And I guess Moskowitz and Burchett agree with that. So they're going to have field hearings right outside of these establishments that are holding the UAP evidence. Several journalists recently have indicated, though, that firsthand witnesses of the alleged UAP legacy programs are in the process of providing testimony and evidence to the relevant authorities and or on the verge of making public statements. So folks, it's important that we keep these hearings going. Maybe if you guys have the time, you can call your rep. It's especially important that we voice our support for the Senator Schumer's UAP disclosure bill. And it's a good first step towards furthering transparency as a whole. I'd like to move on now, and there's a case that I'd like to move on and talk about. It occurred back in 1952, and it's the UK's most famous case having to do with Nordics, and the woman involved, Jessie Rostenberg, is so credible that I was taken by it, and I thought I would share this. Okay, so it happened in 1954, and it's a UFO case that is the UK's most famous close encounter with Nordic aliens. Back in 1954, a British woman by the name of Jessie Rostenberg claimed to have seen a disc-shaped flying saucer of aluminum color hovering over her cottage near Staffordshire. She also saw two Nordic figures that were sitting in the craft. I'm taking this from an article by Vicky Verma. He's an excellent author and writer. And the article is named 1954 Jessie Rostenberg UFO Case is UK Most Famous Close Encounter with Nordic Aliens. And it's from an online magazine, I assume, called How and Whys. Vicky Verma wrote this up. So Jessie Rostenberg was a wife of a young Dutchman named Tony Rostenberg, and lived with her. They lived with their two sons and a daughter in a small cottage farm near Staffordshire, UK. It was a very remote area, and they had no electricity and no indoor plumbing, which is pretty unusual. but I guess back then, not so much. On October the 21st of 1954, at around 4:45 p.m., she was inside her home with her 2-year-old daughter. Her 2 sons, one 8 years old, the other 6 years old, were playing outside in the garden. Suddenly, she heard a loud sound like an aircraft crash. As she stepped out, her sons were terrified and shouting, quote, "Mommy, Mommy, there's a flying saucer," end quote. She saw a round UFO that was hovering above them. The woman stated that the front part of the object was transparent, and she could see 2 human-like figures inside of it. She described them as Nordics with long hair and long faces. Jesse saw them wearing tight-fitting blue suits, and their heads were in transparent helmets. This is a quote from one of the newspapers back then. Woman today told the Express and Star that she and her 2 children had been terrified by a flying saucer carrying 2 long-haired human-like creatures in tight-fitting jerseys. The machine landed in the garden. Not so sure if that's correct. I don't think it landed. I think it just hovered. Anyway, it goes on to say, she stated when she heard a noise like a crashing aircraft, Mrs. Jessie Rosenberg ran out into the garden. She found her 2 children lying prostrate and terrified. The next house to the vicarage farm is about 2 miles away, so they're in a very remote area. Nearest neighbor was 2 miles away. Above the children was a huge saucer-like object with a dome. Okay, that can be frightening. The front part of which was transparent, stated Mrs. Rostenberg. Staring at the children from the machine were 2, quote, unsmiling human-like creatures with long faces and long hair. And if you're able to see, there's a graphic from the newspaper of a sketch that Jessie Rosenberg made of the craft. And it sort of looks like a top, or I think she describes it as a Mexican sombrero. And you can see that she sketched in 2 human-like figures in the front there. There's also a picture of her and her 2 sons to the left there. According to this newspaper, she told reporters that the UFO circled the house 2 times before it flew away at high speed. She noted that the 2 creatures had pitiful faces. Not sure if she said pitiful faces. I think sympathetic faces or empathetic faces is what she actually says. And I'll go on to show the videotape of her interview. Quote, "The boys were so terrified that they would not go out again last night," she said. "The dog was nowhere to be seen. I think it must have bolted. I can imagine." There was a researcher back then by the name of Gavin Gibbons who investigated the Rosenberg case, and he wrote about it in his book, The Coming of Spaceships. He wrote the following in that book. Gavin Gibbons said, "When I visited the Rosenberg's house almost 3 weeks after the sighting, Jessie Rosenberg appeared. She seemed highly strained and nervous, and her husband, coming in later, was also very strained. It was evident that something most unusual had occurred." Okay, I'm going to show you a clip of the interview. As I said, I find her very credible.
Staffordshire's had a whole crop of flying saucers. Spots in the sky, lights in the sky, strange things. But the strangest of all was seen one day over this cottage. Mr. and Mrs. Rustenberg were living there, quietly, out in the country. And, well, you just tell me what you saw.
Well, it was one ordinary day. I was waiting for my husband to come home from work, and my 2 sons went to SCIF to school, and I was getting changed, and I heard this terrific noise. It was just like a giant cauldron of water being poured onto a fire, a shh sort of noise, you know. And my first reaction was, oh, the children. I thought maybe a plane was crashing or something like that. And I slipped my jumper on and went outside to find my 2 sons lying flat on the ground in the garden in front of the house, shouting, "Mummy, Mummy, there's a flying saucer." Well, naturally, I just said, "Come on, don't be stupid. Come in the house." But felt sort of a strange sensation. Wended my way up the side of the house to where we had a pump where we used to get all our water from, and automatically looked up to see this, all I can describe, this huge Mexican hat. It was stationary, this thing, and it was bright silver in colour, and it had a dome. It was tilted to sort of, I could see the occupants in it.
You saw people in it?
I saw people in it. There were 2 people in there. These people were beautiful people. That's the only way I can describe them. They had long golden hair, like a page boy bob, just like the old kings. You used to see photographs of the old kings. And the colour of the hair was golden. Now, I was really...
What were they dressed in?
They had a sort of a polo neck jumper affair, like a ski top suit, in pale blue. Now, these people weren't sat one behind the other. They were sat together, but this, whatever it was tilted so that I could see them and they could see me.
Were you looking at them through windows, through portholes, or what?
No, not portholes. It was just sort of like a cockpit, I suppose, that had this perspex or glass or whatever it was. They could see me anyway, and I could see them. And they had beautiful faces. I shall never forget their faces as long as I live. Their foreheads seemed to be a bit larger than, you know, the bottom of their faces as normal people you would expect to see. But maybe this was just whatever they had round their heads, which was like a transparent fishbowl. And they just looked, and I was absolutely paralytic with fear. I couldn't move, although my mind was ticking over. And they looked so sympathetic that I was just mesmerized for what seemed to be, ages, but it could have only been seconds. And I turned to sort of look down at the boys, was unaware that they were with me because I was so absorbed. And the next thing, I looked up and it was gone.
How low had it been?
It had been the height, I couldn't tell you. But the house that you've seen, it was just on top of the roof. It was hovering on top of the roof.
How big was it compared with the size of the house?
It swallowed the whole circumference of the roof. I couldn't see, the roof was completely blotted out. The chimneys I couldn't see. All I could see was this massive object that I described as like a Mexican hat without the bubbles.
And then it flew away sideways or upwards?
No, I didn't see. I just looked up and it had gone. But I assume it went straight up, because for a short while after in the sky I looked around and I said to my 2 boys, "Where, can you see anything? Can you see anything?" And they said, "There it is, Mum," and they pointed up, and I watched it. It was just like a little cotton reel in the sky, and it circled us 3 times. It went round 3 times, and then it just shut off, and that was it. When I started to analyse myself afterwards, I feared that I might have had an hallucination, but then I knew I hadn't had, because my sons were so sure about what they'd seen and what I'd seen. And it went through my mind that it was a secret weapon from Russia, and then I thought, well, it can't be that, because if they had something like that, they wouldn't need to fear anybody or anything.
Were you scared by it? Did you run
Oh,
indoors?
I was petrified. I couldn't move. I couldn't move a muscle. I was paralyzed with fear. But now I wouldn't be. Because now, when I look back, you know, I think, what an amazing thing to have happened, and for me to have seen it.
And when your husband came home, where were you?
Well, when my husband came home from the office, I was locked in the house with my children under a big kitchen table that we were using.
Under the table?
Under the table, yes. It's funny now when I look back. You know, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but this is the truth. This happened. And that's it. We were ridiculed. It was very embarrassing at the time, and people, they possibly thought, oh, she's a nutter. But, you know, who cares? This is something that happened to me, and I'm a practically minded person, and that's it.
Okay, so my reaction to that is that I find her very credible. Her two sons were involved in it, and she didn't make any profit off of that. If anything, she said that they were made fun of, so she had her reputation to lose and her family. Why would she come out and make up a story like that? Sounds very credible to me. Some of these stories that you see on the internet are hoaxes. She didn't have any video evidence, but she comes across as so genuine. I'm going to go on to read the rest of this article here and then show you a clip of what she looks like today, or what she looked like much years later, which she never backed off of her story, by the way. Okay, so the researcher there, Gavin Gibbons, based on his interviews with the family, he gave a more detailed account of the Rostenberg story and what was seen. He said they looked very earthly, men with white skins, long hair down to their shoulders. Their foreheads seemed immensely high, with the features almost entirely in the bottom half of their faces. Their heads were enclosed in what appeared to be some sort of transparent helmet, and they were dressed in clothes of turquoise blue that resembled ski suits that Mrs. Rosenberg had seen. As far as the UFO or UAP leaving, Jesse said, and I quote, "It was hovering over the house, very low and completely silent. A queer sound, a queer round thing was standing in the air immediately over the little cottage. Their heads were in a whirl as Jesse Rosenberg watched appalled. The Vimana," okay, so this is, I guess, the researcher speaking, because he would call these crafts Vimanas, "began to move, flashing a purple-blue light from the front of it. As it did so at an angle of 45 degrees, it started to ascend, making no sound as it moved, but continuing the flashing the whole time. With a gasp of relief, Jessie ran into the house, intent on finding a pencil and paper to sketch what she and the children had seen. As she looked for the stub of a pencil, the boys called out again from the garden. With fear returning once more to her heart, she ran outside to see the saucer coming back again. This time from north to south, it circled the house in an anti-clockwise direction 1.5 times and then streaked skywards. It had gone at last." And you guys can see this image. This is a family of the Rostenberg family. There's Jesse on the left, the father holding the small daughter, and the two boys in the front. Okay, and the article goes on to say that Tony Rostenberg, the husband, afterwards saw something unusual on the following October the 24th, 1954, when he climbed the roof of his house. He saw a high-speed, cigar-shaped UFO suddenly disappear into the clouds. How about that? So there were follow-up incidents. This one was a cigar-shaped craft that the husband saw. Another incident happened on December the 15th, I guess right before Christmas, 1954. Tony, the husband, Jesse's husband, saw a bright ball flying very silently in the sky. The fireball was moving very slow at a low altitude. After some time, he heard the sound of an airplane coming from the east. As the plane approached closer, the fireball flew away at an incredibly high speed, disappearing in no time. The researcher, Garen Gibbons, visited the Rosenbergs at their new home in Stafford, so I guess they relocated many times in 1955, the following year. He was assured that there was no motive for a hoax. They looked happy in the new house, and when Gibbons asked why they had left the old house, Tony replied that since the first UFO incident had happened, the house became haunted for them. Okay, so in 1976, Hugh Burnett was preparing a UFO documentary for the BBC. He approached Charles Bowen and Gordon Creighton of Flying Saucer Review. They gave him the contact information for Jesse Rosenberg. The documentary was titled Out of This World, and it was first broadcast on May the 10th, 1977 on BBC. It's largely responsible for reviving interest in the case, and today most people are probably familiar with Jesse Rosenberg's story via the YouTube clip that I just showed and from her program. It's often shared with comments noting how genuine, sincere, and credible she appears. This is a picture of her later on. She described the saucer as looking like a Mexican hat, and the occupants were beautiful people with long golden hair wearing coverings over their heads like a transparent fishbowl. And if you can see this, this is Jesse Rosenberg with a graphic sketch of two Nordic figures which she had seen inside the UFO that hovered her cottage in 1954. She said that they just looked, and I was absolutely paralytic with fear. She said that she couldn't move, although my mind was taking over. After checking on her boys, she said that she looked up and it was gone. Asked about the size of the object, she says it was, quote, massive, and that it was larger than the roof of the house. She said they saw the object again in the distance, that it circled them 3 times, then it shot off. Here's a short clip of Jesse Rosenberg. She lived to be 90, okay? And she never backed off her story. This is what makes her so credible. Okay, so this is Jesse Rosenberg at 90 years old. This was shot by a John Hansen in 2015. Okay, so this is the same lady that saw the UFO over her cottage in 1952. This is Jesse Rosenberg, now age 90.
The illustration.
And the face is slim either side.
A lot slimmer.
Beautiful.
Would that be why the Gavin Gibbons, when he did the illustration, I
Yeah.
think it was a UFO News or something, that was a lot thinner in the face.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Sorry about that, Jesse. I hadn't realised.
So we're Dawn's interrupting
That's
with a
right.
cup of tea. Come
When
on
I
then, Dawn.
looked back, the saucer was no longer there, but a few minutes later we saw it circle the house 3 times before it shot upwards like a rocket against the blue of the darkening sky. Quite true.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that was Jesse Rosenberger at 90 years old. As I said, I found her quite credible. And then when I saw the clip of her at 90 years old, and she still had not backed off her story, how could you not believe her? She had to have seen something. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly thought that was noteworthy, even though she didn't provide any evidence, but just her character alone is so sincere and genuine. I believe her, for one. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Let's not forget that there's another SCIF meeting that the Congress people are having on November the 15th, and hopefully they'll have the clearances to hear the testimony that the Inspector General is supposed to be giving the Congress people, given to him, by the way, by Grush, which everyone has been anticipating what Grush told the Inspector General, and he could not say during the UAP hearings because it could only be divulged or shared in a SCIF environment. Also, on December the 22nd, hopefully the UAP amendment will be passed finally. So we have that to look forward to. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I have a YouTube channel. YouTube channel is at UFO Disclosure -BR3YY. My website is UFO-disclosure.com. I have an Instagram, which is UFO Disclosure Podcast. And finally, you can catch my comments every so often right before I put out a podcast on my Twitter feed, which is at UFO Disclosure with an underscore at the end. Thank you so much for listening. All my love and good intentions go out, especially for those out in the Middle East. I'm hoping and praying for a peaceful solution and praying for those that are still being held captive. Let's all manifest a good resolution for that. This is UFO Disclosure. Please keep looking up at the sky and contact your reps if you can to try and get hearings going again and the Schumer bill enacted. Thanks for listening.